Hey guys, it's Mathel here once again, and as I mentioned, I was pretty goddamn excited to get into some Viper striking, but I figured I should try out some Gladiator Bladestorm for the first character of the league. However, the second one, that's all bets are off, and I was ready to do some Viper Strike action. So I did level this character up in the past couple days, based off of the starter build that I put out for Viper Strike Pathfinder, and it is still very much similar. I just needed to explore exactly how to build this character a little better for the league after knowing the league, and there isn't many changes to be shown, but I will of course go over them and let you know what has changed since the starter build video. Specifically just how you're going to be crafting the gear, how you're going to be playing the character, and what is important for it. So far, so good. Viper Strike feels really good at the moment. Nothing really changed mechanically about the skill too much, except for the fact that it gained an entire added Chaos Gems worth of damage onto its base damage. So it was just a lot easier to scale its damage at this point, and of course there's some melee reworks and some good quality of life going on there, which has made it feel pretty damn good. Previously I've played Spectral Throw and Blade Flurry for poison builds, kind of in the past couple years. Besides those, you don't really want to play any poison, but Viper Strike is now a very serious contender as well. And you can see here just how well the poison prolif from the Pathfinder Ascendancy works in some of these situations. For this entire video, I actually don't even run multi-strike on my setup. It is just Ancestral Call and Melee Splash, and then a bunch of damage supports. And you're just running around pretty much one-tapping every single pack. Get a good poison in there, it prolifts to everything around it, and save your cooldowns and your big damage for things that actually matter. So you make sure you try and drop a Wither Totem for bosses. You pop all your flasks, you use your adrenaline, your haste. These bosses really didn't require it, so I didn't, but for things like the Legion mechanic, which unfortunately our Poison Prolif does not work for, it doesn't really matter because you have your Melee Splash and your Ancestral Call. You run in, you tap a few times per pack and move on. So the entire reason we can actually clear this shit is because of Melee Splash and Ancestral Call, and the new Melee Splash really has a lot of overlapping poison damage. So it actually is quite effective when there's a lot of packs out there because it stacks a lot of your poisons up really quickly, and then you can even just kind of get more used to a playstyle where you don't watch things die. You attack, move on, come back, and things are dead. And that really does come in handy for the Legion areas because you can't really afford to stand around and watch them die, and you are still doing insane damage, and you can see just the prolif going to work there. Killing all of those enemies then, and then spreading to the Architect in the Incursion Temple as well. So as I mentioned, the prolif doesn't work on the Legion shit, but that's only the first half of the Legion. The part where you have to unfreeze them. Once they are unfrozen, the prolif still works pretty well, and you can clear entire packs without even being on the screen. So for Legion, it hasn't been the best thing ever, but it has been actually a very solid contender and a much better clearer than the Bladestorm Gladiator that I've got, simply because you can scale damage on this build so much higher. But once you start fine-tuning the character overall, you do get quite a lot of damage, and the clear on Legions becomes very smooth. But it really does all begin with the Melee Splash Ancestral Call playstyle, and that's when you can actually start clearing a lot of Legion action. And then as well as that, I've done quite a bit of delving, and delve is actually very smooth as well. You can easily see the poison prolif going to work in a lot of delve scenarios too, and character has a decent amount of life gain on hit, mobility, a little bit of evasion, dodge, so the defense isn't too bad as well. And overall, it's been a very nice delve character, I think, at least so far. And the ramp that it's kind of shitty on really sort of big bosses. It's going to take 5 to 10 seconds to get your damage up. Doesn't really matter on much lower content because the damage is vastly overkill anyway. So the ramp only really becomes a factor once you start doing the high-end bosses. Whereas for everything else, it's absolutely fine. You can see that this tier 9 Elder, once the damage starts to ramp, it gets so crazy, but it does take a good few seconds for the Viper Strike ramp to actually kick in, because you need to get all your poisons up, and it is a 10-second duration, so it's going to take a while to actually effectively start doing damage. You could even see that without Wither Totems on this tier 9 Elder, he was just melting. And if everything is up all at the right time, at the moment I'm rocking something like 3 to 4 million poison damage, and that is pretty nutty damage. But like I said, it is rampy, and you do also have to swap in a single target setup, which can be a little clunky, but it's not really too much of an issue for most boss fights out there. So for the most part, you are dealing something like 1 to 2 million poison damage. Once you swap into your single target, it doubles and is a bit clunkier. So I want to show you guys what the character looks like and how I've changed it since the starter video. So here is our current character, level 89 Wide Peepo Poison. It is a Pathfinder, as I mentioned, based off of the starter build video. Very similar build in the end, but I'm just fine-tuning it as I go for the Legion content. So to start with, I will mention that it levels very smoothly if you have a few leveling uniques. If you don't have the right, or if you don't have a little bit of starting capital, it's not going to be the greatest build to level, but it will get you there, and it is still a starter build by all means. But if you can get yourself a Mortem Morsu, 2 of them at level 34, they will carry you easily all the way up to the real base items for the build, Wasp Nest. So they're based around like very cheap items for poison, like, you know, 1 Alk Claws into 1 Alk or 1 Chaos Claws, and then you fine tune it as you go into bigger, better claws like this, which I'll get to in just a second. Other than that, the build is pretty much going to be what I show you in the starter video. However, I did go with a pure defensive chest instead of using a Cherubims. Now, traditionally, you could use a Dendrobate for poison builds. I really don't value it that much because it's just some poison damage. Since we don't really need the duration, you definitely don't need the less poison attachment, because that does almost nothing since we already have a high amount of poison hit, and the damage it adds is almost nothing. So it's not a very good chest for this type of Viper Strike meta anymore, I don't think. You're either running something like a Cherubims for max damage and a bit of life, or you're just going a pure defensive chest like this one, which I crafted using single pristine fossils until you hit some good life rolls, and then just go with whatever you got. So it's not a very good chest because I have bought and wanted to try and link this temple chest instead. A lot of these out there, so you just go with life, the percent life, that's all one mod, and then some resists, and then you can craft percent life as well. It's just a bit harder to link these up because you have to actually manually link these, whereas you can easily buy a 6-link evasion chest for 20C, which is what this one cost, or 20, 40C, something like that, and then just craft with pristine fossils from there. So getting a 6-link chest and a decent little defensive chest is extremely easy if you can go out and just lower your standards a little. So that's the main bulk of the changes there. And then I'm, of course, min-maxing my build to have these claws over here. So the mod you're looking for is 60% chance for poisons to inflict, for poisons inflicted with this weapon to deal 100% more. So obviously my claws have no real damage associated with them, like the Wasp Nest, or really good attack speed or crit, but the main mod there gives you 60% more damage, basically. And that is a huge amount, and especially once you can craft like this with a good added chaos roll and then put an attack speed roll on there, it becomes a much better claw than Wasp Nest. So you can see here with the path of building, currently about 2.4 million damage with my path of building poison setup. That is against shaper level targets, and that's pure single target. So that's with the claws, and the mod currently doesn't even work. So these are just basic ass nothing claws. If you put on Wasp Nests instead, you're looking at roughly the same damage, about 2.6 million, but you have to incorporate the actual change yourself manually in this sort of program in Path of Building by going Edit, delete this one here, and let's just say your poison damage does 60% more. So you have to do that per weapon, but you can't really edit it that way in POB. So if you just do 60% more poison, since it's on both your weapons, it does end up working out quite nicely. So you just edit it up to say 60% more damage with poison. Wabam. and that's going to apply to both weapons because it's just a more multiplier to your entire global poison multiplier, and all of a sudden you're looking at 3.8 million poison damage compared to the Wasp Nest about 2.6. So Wasp Nests will easily get you started, but they are 1C weapons and they can be improved upon if you have the right delving sort of modifiers. So that's the biggest changes of the build, and it's more or less about fine-tuning and min-maxing, because you can play the game with Wasp Nest and it will be just fine, but you can absolutely go a little harder, and these aren't even very hard to craft. I'll show you right now just how to craft them. So if you go to the little outside website PoEDB, you click on claws over here, and you can see that there's a bunch of modifiers. Now, if you select Aberrant, so that's a more chaos fossil, you grab a corroded, that's the one that gives you the special poison modifier. You then also put in metallic, that eliminates all fizz rolls. You can see that you're left with almost nothing at this point for things that the claw can then roll. So we grab a level 83 claw. All you can really have as a prefix is the poison more damage. You can have added chaos, and then I actually went in with a 4-socket resonator for all my claws with shuddering fossils as well. It increases your likelihood of getting attack speed, but also removes the mana modifier. So then you're left with just about nothing. So it'll take you a few goes to actually get the exact rolls, potentially. It took me something like 4 rolls, and you'll be left with basically your dream claws. Or you may have to remove a suffix, because suffixes are still plentiful. So quite often suffixes are full. You can either then do a add prefix remove suffix mod and then craft attack speed, or just annul and try and get the suffix free so you can put attack speed on yourself. It's a very reliable way of getting these claws or these poison type weapons, and it's what I did, and it's how we are here. It didn't cost very much. It was something like 40-50 C total, and I've also got despair on hit on this one, so that's a little bit luckier, but it's not even that necessary. It just means simply that I won't be using Witchfire Brew in my build instead of a Jade Flask. So I've instead built around not having Witchfire Brew, which is something that you kind of want to use anyway. But since I got the curse on hit here, I decided I'll just build a little differently, and then I went the Jade Flask, I went a Cinder Swallow, and I am of course igniting with both of these weapons, and then I took Master Alchemist instead of Nature's Adrenaline. If you go the other way, without the Despair on hit, with a Witchfire, it works totally fine as well. It'll be roughly the same amount of damage. This just means that I'm going to be immune to shock every now and again against some of the tougher stuff as well. So I think this is a slightly nicer way of building, but you definitely don't have to do this route by any means. Because this is a lot faster for attack speed and movement speed, but it's going to be slightly less defensive, and overall the damage is about the same. So then the only other thing to really talk about, besides just going over the gear, is my link setup. So for the most part, during your actual attacking phase, you are going to be using Viper Strike, Ancestral Call, Melee Splash. That's your primary 3-link right from the start. Into Added Chaos, so that's going to be your 4th link. You then go Vile Toxins, and then Deadly Ailments. Or either way around for the last 5 or 6 link. Doesn't really matter. They roughly do about the same thing. So these are very important for your clear. It will feel shit on clear if you don't have them. You can though, however, remove Melee Splash for clear, because Ancestral Call hits with your 3 targets, and once you have Prolift going, the Prolift does actually start to do a lot of work. I've tried it out, and I do really think that just having both is a lot nicer for clear, so I've ended up doing that all the time. And when I want to put in single target, most of the time I will just take out Ancestral Call and put in Melee Physical. But when you want to go really big single target, you take out Melee Splash as well and put in Multi-Strike or Fortify, whichever way you want to go, but Multi-Strike is a bit more damage. So the single target full swap is a little clunky. There are 2 of them. The single target half swap isn't that bad. You still have Splash, and it's a lot more damage with Melee Physical. But the AoE clear definitely involves both of these, I think, for maximum feel goodness. So yeah, that's that for your links, and it does give you quite a lot of damage in the end and clear. And then you try and get some +1 unarmed range on, or +1 melee range, sorry, as a prefix on your gloves. You want it on your helm as well, but this is the best helm I could craft after a few attempts, so I couldn't get a spare prefix. And then ideally you get it on your amulet too. They're all prefixes, and it does help just your clear and your smoothness of play a little bit to get that melee weapon range craft. Other than that, you would love to get some chaos damage on your rings. Pretty basic rings otherwise, just some resists, life, maybe a bit of strength and mana, because the more mana you have, the more you'll have unreserved at the end of the day. I did get a Malevolence reduction aura here enchant. If you can get a reduction to any of these, that would be good, but you don't necessarily have to run, well, just about any of these. You can build around not having precision quite easily if you have more accuracy on gear. You don't really need to have Herald of Agony. It's actually kind of crap, but not a bad use of 25% because it gives us 10% more damage. Let's have a look at it. 10% more poison, and then the Agony Crawler, even unlinked, does help with a bit of damage every now and again. And War Banner is mostly there for a little bit of accuracy, but for the adrenaline that it gives you when you place your banner. You definitely want to make sure you have Spell Totem, Multi-Totem, Increased Duration, and Wither going, and it's very key to place these in certain parts during fights, before boss fights, because this Wither Totem setup grants a huge amount of extra damage. So you want to pre-fire it before a boss starts. You want to make sure you're placing it in places where ideally they're not going to die, because if you're being targeted here, hopefully they're over there not being targeted. And I place them before every Legion encounter as well, because it should give you a bit of extra output during those Legion phases too. Besides that, using a Vile Haste, though you can use a Vile Blight as well if you would rather. Then have Malevolence as half of my reservation. Dash every now and again. I'm Whirling Blading almost always, but then you dash over ledges. It doesn't feel that good, but it does help get you over ledges. You then have Whirling Blades, Fortify, Blood Magic, and faster attacks as a setup. And I also plan to have a Frenzy setup for endgame on my left mouse instead of Golem eventually, because Golem is nice to level with and he's nice to have around, but he's going to die a lot once you get to the end game, and I would rather keep up all of my Frenzy charges with a Frenzy single target. And then I've got Blood Rage for my Frenzy charges at the moment. Shit, yeah, that's about it there. We then have Corralitos, which gives you a bunch of poison duration. Like I said, Viper Strike already has so much, but it doesn't hurt to get more when it's at the cost of only one shitty life flask. Or one shitty flask, I mean. So it's definitely worth grabbing still. And aside from that, the passive tree is basically the same as what I showed you guys. The only small differences are that I have started to go for Frenzy nodes as my endgame damage scaling source. However, you don't necessarily have to do that. It's kind of a luxury. You could instead go phase aggro, and I might still do that once I start getting into the end game. But that's about it. I will mention that I went up to the Shadow Tree first when I was leveling, so through here and then straight up to the Shadow Tree, and my first few points were of course going to Master Toxicist. And then lastly, I will also mention that Viper Strike has a rather loud sound at the moment, so since the Legion patch, a couple of skills, Leap Slam, Viper Strike, a few others, have quite a lot of sound differences to them, and it may not be for you, so I play on rather low sound, and I really don't mind the Viper Strike too much, but it does kind of hurt if you really don't want to have to hear something that clunky and that loud. So just fair warning, and other than that, this character's been an absolute blast. I'm having a lot of fun poisoning, prolifing, melting faces, and I think it's going to be pretty good for my end game, which I do plan to reach. I'm pretty sure this guy will go through to Uber Elder and give him the business. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you guys are having fun at Legion, and see you next time.